They said silence makes a home serene, but in the Montgomery mansion, silence was the loudest scream of all. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the rest of this journey. The Montgomery mansion sat on a corner of Fifth Avenue in the Upper East Side, its limestone facade gleaming under the dim winter sun. From the outside, it looked like everything success could buy. The carved stone balconies, the tall glass windows, the manicured hedges clipped to perfection. Neighbors passed it with admiration, whispering about the empire Ethan Montgomery had built. Skyscrapers in Midtown, penthouses along Park Avenue, sprawling resorts in Miami. But inside, the mansion breathed a different air. It was too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that brought peace, but the kind that pressed down on walls and made footsteps echo like accusations. The housekeepers moved silently through the corridors, trained not to disturb the master of the house. The butler kept his voice low, the maids lowered their gaze, and every clock seemed to tick a little too loudly, as though afraid it might be scolded. In the heart of that silence sat a boy, Lucas Montgomery, 12 years old. His desk in the study room was covered in papers, each marked with the same crimson letter, F. The ink looked like wounds, bleeding across the white pages. He stared at them, his lips tightening, his throat closing. The words on the test blurred, the letters dancing and reversing themselves, mocking him. It wasn't that he didn't try. He tried harder than anyone knew, but the letters never sat still long enough for him to catch them. The door opened behind him. Heavy footsteps crossed the marble floor. Lucas froze, his small shoulders stiffening. Worthless! The word cut sharper than any knife. His father, Ethan Montgomery, loomed tall in the doorway. A man whose dark tailored suit seemed to carry the weight of Wall Street itself. His jaw was set, his eyes steel gray, his voice stripped of softness. You failed again, Lucas. How many tutors? How many specialists? And this is what you give me? Ethan's hand swept over the desk, scattering the failed papers like dead leaves. Do you want to live your life being a disappointment? Lucas wanted to answer, but his throat wouldn't open. Shame locked his voice away. He stared at the carpet, the red and gold patterns swimming in his vision. Ethan exhaled sharply, his patience thinning into anger. I built an empire from nothing. I stood in rooms where men twice my age told me I couldn't win. I fought, and I conquered. And you, my son, can't even read a page without stumbling like a fool. The words landed heavy, each one pressing Lucas further into himself. A housekeeper lingered in the hallway, hearing every syllable but not daring to move. The mansion had long been a theater of judgment. Ethan turned, speaking as though Lucas weren't even there. Tomorrow I'll make arrangements. There's a boarding school in Connecticut. Discipline, structure, a place where failures either rise or vanish. The words hit Lucas harder than any slap. Boarding school. Vanish. He felt his chest tighten. His hands gripped the chair so hard his knuckles whitened. He didn't want to vanish. He just wanted his father to see him. Not the grades, not the failures, but him. When Ethan left, silence swallowed the study again. Lucas sat motionless, the word worthless pounding in his skull. He didn't cry. He had stopped crying weeks ago after realizing tears didn't soften stone. Instead, he pressed his palms to his ears as if he could muffle the echo of his father's voice. But words don't fade when they come from blood. They dig deep and stay. Later that night, as the household dimmed into its disciplined quiet, Lucas crept down the hallway. He moved like a shadow, his socked feet whispering across the polished floor. He stopped by his father's office door. It was slightly ajar. Inside, Ethan's voice was lower now, speaking into the phone. Yes, the boy's hopeless. Dyslexia, they call it. To me, it's weakness. The world doesn't forgive weakness. Boarding school will handle him. At least he won't stain the Montgomery name here. Lucas's chest collapsed inward. His breath shook. His fists clenched. He wanted to scream that he wasn't weak, that he was trying, but the words wouldn't come. They never came. He backed away quietly, retreating to his room, carrying the weight of a verdict that felt final. He sat on his bed, surrounded by the silence that had become his cage. For a long time, he stared at the failed tests scattered across the floor. The red ink looked almost alive under the lamp's glow. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "I'm broken." The word echoed in his mind until exhaustion finally dragged him under. In the great mansion of silence, a boy believed he was broken. A father believed only in pressure. Neither knew that within days, someone would step through the servant's entrance carrying with her a quiet fire born from her own scars. She would see not failure but possibility. And for the first time in years, the mansion would hear something other than silence. It would hear hope. The morning sun crawled across the skyline of Manhattan, casting its pale gold over the Montgomery mansion. But inside Lucas's room, there was no glow of warmth, only the cold reminder of another school day that felt like a battlefield he could never win. His alarm had gone off 30 minutes earlier. He lay still, staring at the ceiling, counting the faint cracks in the plaster. Each day felt like a repeat of the last, a test, a failure, a punishment. The housekeepers moved around the halls outside, their footsteps muffled against the thick rugs. Somewhere downstairs, a coffee grinder hummed, Ethan's routine before heading to his office at Montgomery Properties. Everything in the mansion moved with discipline, like a well-oiled machine. Everything except Lucas. When he finally sat up, his eyes landed on the desk across the room. Scattered across it were the papers from last night, the red F's glaring up at him, as if the ink itself carried a voice that whispered, "Broken, broken, broken." He crossed the floor, bare feet against the wood, and lifted one paper. The words swam again. The question read, "Identify the main idea of the passage." But Lucas couldn't focus on the meaning. The letters themselves betrayed him, flipping and tilting like a cruel dance. Main became Naeem. Idea became 80. It wasn't just a mistake. It was war inside his brain. He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to steady the letters, but it only made them dance harder when he looked again. His throat tightened, and he slammed the paper down, unable to face the page anymore. School called it dyslexia. Teachers described it with clinical terms: phonological deficit, impaired decoding, cognitive load. But for Lucas, none of those terms mattered. What mattered was that when he sat in class, his classmates turned in neat essays, while his was a mess of crossed-out words and blank spaces. What mattered was the laughter, the whispers, the heavy sighs of teachers who had long stopped believing. He tugged at the collar of his shirt. Another day at Manhattan private school meant another parade of humiliation. By mid-morning, he sat in the back row of his English class. The teacher, Mr. Whitaker, droned on about essay structure, writing words across the whiteboard in bold black marker. Introduction, body, conclusion, he repeated, as if it were a chant. Lucas copied, but the letters distorted on his page. His pencil moved slowly, his head bent low so no one could see the struggle. Still, he could feel the eyes of the other boys around him, polished shoes, pressed uniforms, confidence glowing from their laughter. "Lucas," Mr. Whitaker said suddenly, "would you read the first paragraph aloud?" Lucas froze. Heat rushed to his face. He looked at the page, letters bouncing, colliding, taunting him. His lips parted, but no sound came out. "Well?" the teacher pressed, impatience sharpening his tone. Lucas stammered, The, His eyes darted to the clock. 30 seconds felt like hours. Laughter bubbled from the back row. One boy whispered just loud enough, "Worthless." The word struck harder because it echoed his father's. Lucas's hand shook so violently the pencil rolled off his desk. He shoved the paper aside, muttering, "I can't." The teacher sighed, marking something in his gradebook. "We'll move on. Again. Gentlemen, preparation is key. Some of you clearly lack it." Lucas shrank into his chair. When the bell rang, he shoved his books into his bag and bolted down the hallway. His chest felt like it was caving in. At his locker, he slammed the door shut harder than he intended. A teacher walking past frowned but said nothing. He didn't care. At lunch, he sat alone at the far corner of the cafeteria. Around him, boys traded stories about their weekends in the Hamptons, ski trips in Vermont, private jets. Lucas stabbed at his food without appetite. His tray looked like a battlefield, too, forks leaving scars across mashed potatoes. He remembered the words he'd overheard last night. Hopeless, stain, vanish. His father's voice carried more weight than any diagnosis, more than any medical report. If his father said he was weak, then maybe it was true. Maybe he was. He picked up his notebook, flipping through it. Page after page was covered in jagged erasures, half-formed words, sentences that crumbled halfway through. To anyone else it looked like chaos. To him it looked like scars, the proof of every war he fought and lost on paper. Paper scars. He traced one with his finger, the groove where his pencil had pressed too hard in frustration. His vision blurred, but he refused to let tears fall here. Not in front of them. Not in front of anyone. That evening, back at the mansion, Ethan barely noticed his son slip in. The father was in his office, reviewing contracts worth billions, flipping through legal documents without hesitation. Numbers never danced for him. They obeyed. Lucas hovered near the door, unseen. He wished he could trade places, give his father the storm in his brain just for a day. Maybe then he would understand. Instead, Lucas retreated to the study room. He spread his books across the desk again, determined to try. Maybe if he pushed harder, the letters would finally stay still. He copied a paragraph, mouthing each word slowly. But halfway through, frustration exploded. He ripped the paper in half, crumpled it, and hurled it across the room. His chest heaved as he whispered, "I'll never get it. I'll never be enough." The silence of the mansion pressed in again. Only the faint ticking of the clock reminded him that time kept moving, even when he felt stuck in the same nightmare. That night, Lucas lay awake long after midnight. The papers littered his floor like fallen soldiers. The shadows stretched across the ceiling. His thoughts spun. What if Dad's right? What if I really am worthless? He remembered the way his classmates' laughter felt like knives, the way Mr. Whitaker sighed, the way his father's voice never softened. He turned over, hugging his pillow, wishing for something, someone, to see him differently. But he didn't know that within hours, the mansion's silence would be broken. By a woman who had once fought the same battle. By someone who carried her own paper scars and a memory of a mother's voice that had turned failure into fire. Her name was Maya Johnson, and she was already on her way. The Montgomery mansion always looked the same in the early morning, polished brass handles gleaming, marble steps scrubbed to perfection, and the uniformed staff arriving one by one through the back entrance. The front door was reserved for guests of a certain caliber, investors, partners, and friends of Ethan Montgomery, who lived in penthouses overlooking Central Park. But the back door was where the invisible lives of the staff passed through every day, unnoticed by the city that worshipped Ethan's wealth. That morning, among the quiet shuffle of uniforms and hushed greetings, a new figure appeared. She carried a worn leather bag slung over her shoulder, her shoes scuffed from long miles, her coat frayed at the sleeves. Her name was Maya Johnson. At 32, she had already lived a dozen lives. She had scrubbed hospital floors in Atlanta, folded linens in motels along the interstate, and worked in diners where the tips never covered the rent. Each place left its mark on her hands. Calluses, small scars, skin roughened not by laziness, but by work too heavy for one person to bear. Still, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her back straight, her chin lifted just enough to show she had not yet been broken. When the butler, Mr. Pierce, looked her over, his brows tightened slightly. He was used to crisp uniforms, polished manners, staff who blended into the wallpaper. Maya, in her thrift store coat and weather-worn shoes, did not blend. "You're the new maid?" His voice held skepticism. "Yes, sir," Maya replied, steady. "Maya Johnson, hired through the agency." He glanced at her bag, then back at her face. "The Montgomerys expect discretion, punctuality, and obedience." "This is not Atlanta." His tone made the city sound like a stain. Maya's lips pressed together at the mention of her hometown. She didn't argue. She had learned long ago that the less she explained, the better. People saw what they wanted to see. Inside, the mansion unfolded before her. Grand staircases sweeping upward, oil paintings glowering from paneled walls, chandeliers glittering like frozen rain. It was beautiful, yes, but cold, too polished, too perfect. A place where laughter would echo strangely. She was shown to her quarters in the staff wing, a small room just wide enough for a narrow bed and a desk. Maya set her bag down, her hands brushing against the leather worn smooth by years. Inside were the only things she truly owned: a framed photo of her late mother, a notebook filled with lessons written in faded ink, and a piece of chalk wrapped in cloth. Her mother had been the light of her life. A teacher in Atlanta who had fought her own battles with words. Dyslexia had chained her too once, but she had learned to break the chains with patience, creativity, and resilience. And when Maya, as a child, showed the same struggle, her mother refused to let her drown in shame. She taught her differently, with drawings, with sounds, with touch. Letters traced in sand, words sung aloud, stories broken into pieces small enough to hold. Her mother had called it learning with the whole body. The world might call it multisensory instruction now, attaching it to research papers and conferences, but for Maya, it was her mother's gift. And though her mother had passed years ago, the lessons lived on in her memory like an eternal flame. That afternoon, Maya was sent to polish the study room. It was quiet when she entered, the scent of old books heavy in the air. The curtains filtered sunlight into pale stripes across the carpet. She began dusting shelves, moving carefully between towering stacks of encyclopedias. Then she saw him. A boy sat at the desk, shoulders hunched, hair falling into his eyes. Papers were scattered before him, pages slashed with red ink. His pencil lay abandoned, his hands curled tightly on his knees. Lucas Montgomery. Maya paused, her cloth in midair. Something in the boy's posture tugged at her memory. She stepped closer, her movements soft enough not to startle him. But when her eyes fell on the papers, her breath caught. Every page bore the same jagged marks she had once seen in her own notebooks. Words half-formed, letters reversed, margins torn from erasures too forceful. She didn't need anyone to explain. She knew exactly what she was looking at. Lucas turned slightly, noticing her at last. His face flushed with embarrassment, as if being caught in his failure was worse than anything. He started to gather the papers, to hide them. Maya spoke before she could stop herself. You don't have to hide them. The boy froze. No one had ever said that to him. His father called them shameful. Teachers called them lazy. Even the staff whispered pity behind closed doors. But never this. Never acceptance. Maya felt her chest tighten. Memories surged. Herself at 10 years old, sitting at a kitchen table in Atlanta, tears dripping onto smudged pages. Her mother's voice beside her, gentle but firm. The words may dance, baby, but you can learn their rhythm. She blinked, forcing the memory down, and cleared her throat. It's not your fault, she said softly. Those letters, they're tricksters. They jump around, they switch places, but they don't mean you're broken. Lucas's eyes widened. He had never heard someone describe it that way. Before he could respond, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Maya instinctively stepped back, returning to her dusting. Ethan Montgomery appeared in the doorway, his presence filling the room. He glanced at his son, then at the maid. Lucas stiffened, bracing for scorn. Maya lowered her gaze, pretending to be absorbed in polishing. Ethan's eyes lingered for a moment, but he said nothing, only muttering instructions to the butler before leaving again. When the silence returned, Lucas whispered, almost afraid to believe it. You know? Maya turned back, her voice steady but kind. Yes, I know. For a moment, something fragile flickered in the boy's eyes, like a candle in a draught. Maya smiled faintly, though her heart ached. She had come to this mansion as a maid, nothing more. But standing there, she realized she had stumbled into a life that mirrored her own past. And maybe, just maybe, she could pass on the gift her mother had given her. That night, as Maya unpacked her few belongings, she placed her mother's notebook on the desk in her small room. She ran her fingers over the pages, hearing her mother's voice in every scribbled note. She whispered to herself, almost like a vow, I'll help him. I don't care if no one notices. I won't let that boy believe he's worthless. In another part of the mansion, Lucas lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in weeks, he replayed someone's words without pain. It's not your fault. The mansion was still silent, but beneath the silence, a quiet shift had begun. Hope had slipped in through the back door, wearing worn shoes and carrying a leather bag. Her name was Maya Johnson. And nothing in the Montgomery mansion would ever be the same again. The next morning, the Montgomery mansion awoke in its usual silence. The butler glided from room to room, the maids dusted quietly, and Ethan Montgomery's voice carried sharply from his office as he dictated orders to a broker over the phone. It was business as usual, the same rhythm that had carried through the house for years. But for Lucas, something felt different. He still dreaded the day ahead. Another school assignment waiting to be botched, another disappointment for his father. Yet beneath the dread lingered a memory, a woman's voice telling him, it's not your fault. That sentence replayed in his mind like a song he wasn't ready to let go of. Lucas lingered in the study room, pretending to flip through a textbook. His father had left for a meeting downtown, which meant the room belonged to him for the moment. He ran his fingers along the edges of the desk, staring at the notebook open before him. The words twisted, as always, but today he didn't push them away. He kept hearing Maya's voice. She had spoken as if she understood. The door creaked softly. Lucas looked up. Maya slipped inside, holding a feather duster in one hand, though her eyes betrayed that cleaning wasn't her real reason for being here. She paused near the shelves, waiting for him to retreat into silence again. But he didn't. Do you... Lucas hesitated, unsure if he could trust her. Do you really know what it's like? With the letters? Maya set the duster aside. Her voice lowered to something gentle, almost conspiratorial. When I was your age, the words danced, too. I thought I was stupid. Teachers told me I was lazy. My own father called me hopeless. But my mother, she taught me a different way. Lucas blinked, sitting up straighter. No adult had ever admitted something like that. You had it too? Yes, Maya said, stepping closer. And I still remember the day she handed me a pencil and said, "Hold it like a sword, not a chain." That was the first time I believed maybe I wasn't broken. She pulled a chair closer and sat opposite him. Lucas's eyes lingered on hers, wide with the fragile hope that she wasn't just saying it to be kind. Show me how you write, Maya said. Lucas hesitated, then picked up his pencil. His grip was tight, his knuckles white. He bent over the page, struggling with a simple word. Son. The letters wobbled, the N reversed, his hand stiff with shame. Maya reached out, gently adjusting his fingers. Not like that. You grip it like you're fighting the paper. Relax. Like this. She guided his hand so the pencil rested more softly between his fingers. Lucas looked at her uncertainly. See? She whispered. That pencil is a sword, and you're the knight. The words aren't your enemy. They're shadows. You can slice through shadows. Lucas blinked. For the first time, someone wasn't laughing at the way he held a pencil. They weren't scolding him or sighing in frustration. They were whispering encouragement. He tried again. Slowly, shakily, he wrote the word son. The letters weren't perfect, but they stood in the right order this time. He looked up, almost disbelieving. Maya's smile spread across her face like sunrise. You see, you did that. You fought the shadows. Lucas's lips twitched. For the first time in weeks, a faint, uncertain smile broke across his face. They worked for half an hour, Maya's voice never rising above a whisper. She didn't correct every mistake. She didn't sigh or shake her head. Instead, she leaned in and spoke words that felt like lifelines. Good try. Look again. You're closer this time. Lucas began to relax. His shoulders loosened, his pencil strokes steadied. And when he stumbled, he no longer froze, because she didn't let the stumble define him. When he finally managed to read a full sentence aloud, the sound surprised even him. It was halting, but it was whole. His throat closed with sudden tears he hadn't expected. I did it, he whispered. Yes, you did. Maya's eyes glistened too, though she blinked them away quickly. She knew how much those small victories mattered. They were mountains disguised as pebbles. Just then, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Lucas stiffened, fear rushing back. Ethan. Maya quickly shifted, lifting the duster again as though she had been cleaning all along. The door opened. Ethan's tall frame filled the doorway. His sharp gaze swept over the room. Lucas kept his head down, panic fluttering in his chest. Ethan's eyes lingered on the maid for a moment, suspicion flickering across his face, but he said nothing. He turned away, his phone pressed to his ear, already consumed by the next deal. When the door closed again, Lucas let out a shaky breath. If he finds out... Maya cut him off softly. Let me worry about that. You just keep fighting your shadows. Lucas studied her for a long moment. For the first time in his young life, he felt what trust might look like. That evening, after Lucas went upstairs, Maya lingered in her small room in the staff wing. She pulled out her mother's notebook again, thumbing through the faded lessons. Trace letters in sand, use rhythm, build memory through touch. She could almost hear her mother's voice guiding her. She whispered to the empty room, He's just a boy, Mama, but he's carrying stones too heavy for him. I'll help him carry them. Upstairs, Lucas sat on his bed, holding the page where he had written son. It wasn't perfect. It tilted slightly, uneven. But it was his first victory. For the first time, he didn't fall asleep hearing his father's voice call him worthless. He fell asleep hearing another voice, soft and steady. You grip that pencil like a sword. And for the first time, the silence of the mansion didn't feel suffocating. It felt like the pause before something new. The Montgomery mansion had always been a place of routine. Breakfast was served at exactly 7:30 in the dining room. Ethan's car arrived at precisely 8 to take him downtown, and by 9 the house fell into its familiar hush. But hidden within that routine, something new was taking root, something that no one but a 12-year-old boy and a maid with worn shoes knew about. Lucas had begun waiting for those quiet hours. The moment the echo of his father's footsteps faded and the front door closed, he slipped into the study room. Maya would appear not long after, carrying her dusting cloth or a stack of towels as a disguise. Yet tucked under her arm, she often brought something else, a notebook, a small bag. Once, even a tray filled with fine sand she had quietly borrowed from the garden supplies. The lessons were never announced. They lived in the shadows of the mansion, whispered between the dust and the ticking of clocks. On the first morning, Maya spread the tray of sand across the desk. Lucas stared at it, puzzled. "What's this for?" he asked. "To fight the shadows," Maya said. She picked up a pencil and drew a letter into the sand. "Your brain has been fighting with the way letters look on paper, but your fingers, your hands, they can teach your eyes what to see." Lucas hesitated, then leaned forward. Slowly, he traced the shape of an S into the grains. The sand resisted, forcing him to slow down, to feel the curves. "Now say it," Maya encouraged. "S." Again. Trace, say, write, read. That's the rhythm. Your brain remembers better when all your senses join in. It felt strange, almost childish, but Lucas obeyed. By the third try, the letter no longer slipped away from him. He could see it, feel it, hear it all at once. His lips curled into a smile before he realized it. Maya noticed. That's what victory looks like. Not loud, not grand, just steady. The lessons continued day by day, each with its own secret method. Sometimes Maya pulled small blocks from her bag, painted with bright colors, and had Lucas build words like towers. Other times she closed the books entirely and taught him to clap rhythms for syllables, making the language dance instead of blur. One morning she handed him a slip of paper with a short sentence. The cat ran fast. Lucas groaned. "I'll mess it up." "Then mess it up proudly," Maya replied. "Mistakes are not shame, they're teachers." He tried, stumbling through the words. The cat ran Breathe, Maya whispered. "Look at the letters with your finger." "Trace them in the air." Lucas traced, spoke again, and this time the sentence emerged, halting, but whole. His breath caught in his throat. "I read it." "You did," Maya said softly. Tears pricked Lucas's eyes. He hadn't realized how heavy the word worthless had weighed on him until that moment of triumph lifted it, if only an inch. But shadows always lurked. One afternoon, while Ethan was away, Lucas managed to read a longer passage. The moment the last word left his lips, he dropped the book and burst into tears. He pressed his fists to his eyes, his voice shaking. "Why couldn't I do this before? Why did everyone tell me I was broken?" Maya knelt beside him. "Because they didn't understand. They thought learning only worked one way, straight lines on a page. But you're proof that brilliance doesn't always follow straight lines." Lucas sniffled, lifting his head. "Brilliance?" "Yes," Maya said firmly. Do you know how much courage it takes to fight words that betray you every day? That's brilliance. Not everyone sees it, but I do. For the first time, Lucas let someone hug him. His small body shook in her arms, releasing years of shame in trembling sobs. The gossip in the mansion grew louder. Servants whispered in corners. The maid is spending too much time with the boy. Some scoffed that she was overstepping. Others sneered that she wouldn't last. Maya heard the whispers. She saw the narrowed eyes of Mr. Pierce, the butler. But she didn't stop. One evening, while polishing silver in the kitchen to keep up appearances, she overheard two housekeepers. Mr. Montgomery won't like it when he finds out, one said. Like or not, the other replied. The boy looks different these days. He even smiled yesterday. Maya hid her smile behind the gleam of a candlestick. Their secret lessons grew bolder. Maya introduced multi-sensory drills, sand tracing, word-building blocks, even clay letters molded with Lucas's hands. The study room transformed from a prison into a sanctuary. One rainy afternoon, lightning flickered beyond the tall windows. Lucas sat hunched over, lips trembling as he tried to read a passage from his textbook. His hands shook, tears threatening. I can't. Yes, you can, Maya whispered. Remember the rhythm. Trace, say, write, read. He slammed his fist down. It's too hard. Maya didn't flinch. She lowered her voice to the same steady whisper she always used when storms rose inside him. Then we fight harder. Look at me, Lucas. Say it with me. I am not broken. Lucas swallowed. I am not broken. Again. I am not broken. The storm outside cracked with thunder, but inside the study a different sound emerged. Lucas's voice, louder, clearer, carrying a conviction he had never felt before. He turned back to the book, and with trembling determination, he read the passage line by line, imperfect, halting, but complete. When he finished, he looked at Maya through tears. I did it. I really did it. She nodded, her own voice breaking. Yes, Lucas, you did. He collapsed into laughter and sobs all at once, burying his face in his hands. For the first time, his tears were not of shame, but of triumph. That night, Lucas ran up to his room carrying the page he had read. He taped it to his wall like a trophy. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with pride. Meanwhile, in her small room downstairs, Maya opened her mother's notebook again. Her hands trembled as she read the old scrawled words. Patience is the soil where courage blooms. She whispered into the silence, He's blooming, Mama. He really is. The Montgomery mansion, once suffocated by silence, now carried a secret heartbeat, one that pulsed every time a boy whispered victory in shadows. The Montgomery mansion was never short of whispers. Behind closed doors, in the servants' quarters, by the laundry room where steam rose in ghostly clouds, rumors had always been the true currency of the household. But in recent weeks, the whispers had taken on a sharper edge, a tone of scandal. It began with the butler, Mr. Pierce, noticing how often the boy disappeared into the study with the new maid. Others noticed too. Lucas, who once sulked silently through meals and skulked away from human contact, now carried a flicker of life in his step. He no longer shrank when spoken to, no longer seemed a ghost in his own home. And at the center of it all was Maya Johnson, the maid who didn't behave like the others. She's crossing a line, one housekeeper murmured as she folded linen. Teaching him? That's not her place. Mr. Montgomery will never tolerate it. Mark my words, she'll be gone before summer. The rumors spread like a draft under doors. Maya heard them, of course. How could she not? But she had learned long ago that words could wound only if she let them. She kept her head down, polishing silver and dusting shelves, while her heart beat with the knowledge of what was truly happening. Lucas was learning. Slowly, yes, but learning. The storm began one gray afternoon. Rain streaked the mansion's tall windows, blurring the city beyond into a watercolor of gray and silver. Ethan had returned early from a meeting downtown, his mood darkened by a stalled negotiation. When he entered the hallway, his steps were sharp, impatient. As he passed the study, he paused. Voices drifted through the cracked door, not just one, but two. He pushed the door open without warning. Inside, Lucas sat at the desk, his pencil moving across a page. Maya was beside him, leaning close, her voice low and steady. Sound it out. Trace say, write, read. Lucas whispered the word, halting but clear, his face lit with triumph. Ethan froze in the doorway. His eyes narrowed at the scene. His son, engaged in study, not with a tutor from Manhattan's elite schools, but with a maid. The silence snapped like a wire pulled too tight. Maya rose quickly, her face calm, though her heart pounded. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, her tone respectful. Ethan's gaze shifted from her to Lucas. "What is this?" His voice was cold, clipped. Lucas's throat closed. He wanted to speak, to explain, but fear clamped down. He stared at the desk, panic burning in his chest. "We were just—" Maya began, but Ethan raised a hand. "Enough." His jaw tightened. "Lucas, go to your room." The boy obeyed instantly, shoving his papers into a stack and hurrying past his father, head bowed. The slam of his door upstairs echoed like thunder. Ethan turned back to Maya. "You are here to clean, not to play at being a tutor. I hire specialists for my son's condition. Your interference is neither needed nor welcome." Maya stood her ground. She wanted to say those specialists don't see him, don't believe in him. She wanted to explain that Lucas was learning in a way he had never managed before. But she also knew the man before her was not ready to hear it. His anger was a wall too high to scale in that moment. "Yes, sir," she said simply. Ethan lingered a moment longer, his eyes hard. Then he left, the echo of his footsteps receding down the hall. Maya exhaled slowly, her heart racing. She knew the storm was only beginning. That night, Lucas refused to eat dinner. He stayed in his room, curled up on his bed, staring at the page he had written earlier. He had done it, read the words, written them down, but now fear poisoned the victory. What if his father forbade Maya from helping him again? What if she was sent away? When Maya brought a tray of food to his door, he didn't open it. She set it down gently, whispering through the wood, "I'm not leaving you, Lucas. Not yet. Don't let fear steal your victory." He pressed his face into his pillow, tears burning his eyes. In the staff quarters, the whispers grew louder. "He caught her," one maid whispered. "She'll be dismissed before the week ends." Foolish woman, thinking she could matter here. But Maya moved through her tasks with quiet resolve. She remembered her mother's words. Patience is the soil where courage blooms. She would not give up. Days passed. Ethan watched more closely now. His suspicion sharpened. Whenever he saw Lucas and Maya in the same room, he lingered longer, listening for tones of impropriety. Lucas, meanwhile, lived in constant dread. He avoided the study when his father was near, and when Maya entered, his heart raced with both hope and fear. One evening, lightning split the sky over Manhattan. The mansion shuddered under the weight of the storm. Ethan stood at the tall window of his office, brooding over contracts and failed negotiations. He was a man who thrived on control, but control was slipping, both in business and at home. In the study below, Lucas sat with Maya once more, the storm outside echoing the storm inside him. His hands shook as he tried to read a passage. He stumbled, frustrated. "I can't. Not anymore. He'll take you away." Maya knelt beside him, her voice steady despite her own fear. "Listen to me. Storms come and go, but words, they stay, and you've already proven you can master them." Lightning flashed. Thunder boomed. Lucas pressed his hands over his ears, but Maya reached out, steadying him. "Focus on me," she whispered. "Not the storm outside, not the storm in here, just me. Trace the word." Lucas's hand trembled, but he traced the letters slowly. He whispered the sounds, fighting tears. When he reached the end of the sentence, he looked up, breathless. "I did it," he said, almost in disbelief. "Yes," Maya said softly, "you did." For a moment, the storm outside seemed to quiet, the thunder replaced by the fragile sound of triumph. Upstairs, Ethan heard the faint murmur of voices over the rain. He frowned, suspicion tightening again. But he did not go down. Instead, he stared at his reflection in the glass. For just a heartbeat, he wondered if perhaps he was the one who didn't understand. He shook the thought away. Business awaited. In the days that followed, the whispers in the mansion became a chorus. Some rooted for Maya quietly, seeing the boy's progress. Others sneered, waiting for her fall. Lucas lived in constant fear of losing her. Maya carried on, teaching in shadows, her resolve hardened by every whisper of doubt. The storm had broken, but the battle was far from over. Morning broke cold and clear over Manhattan. The storm of the past nights had washed the city's skyline, leaving it sharp against the pale blue sky. But inside the Montgomery mansion, the air was still thick with tension. Lucas woke with his stomach in knots. Today wasn't just another day at school. Today was the day, the scheduled assessment at Manhattan Private School. It was the kind of test his father valued, formal, standardized, stamped with credibility. A score on this paper could determine his future in the school, and more importantly, in his father's eyes. Lucas sat at the edge of his bed, tying his shoes with trembling fingers. Every muscle in his body wanted to hide, to pretend he was sick, to make the day vanish. Yet in the corner of his desk lay the pages he and Maya had worked on. Words traced in sand, sentences built with blocks, rhythms clapped until his palms stung. He picked one up. The word sun stared back at him, steady and still, no longer flipping or mocking. Maya's voice lingered in his head. The words aren't your enemy. They're shadows, and you can slice through shadows. He clung to that thought as the butler knocked on his door. "Car's waiting, young master." At the breakfast table, Ethan sat with his usual precision. Coffee in a porcelain cup, the Wall Street Journal folded neatly, tie already knotted for the day. Lucas slipped into his chair. Ethan's eyes flicked over him. "Today is important," Ethan said flatly. "I expect you to conduct yourself properly. No excuses. Do you understand?" Lucas nodded mutely. His father returned to the paper, already consumed by stock indexes and real estate forecasts. Maya entered quietly with a tray of toast. As she set it down, her eyes met Lucas's for the briefest moment. She didn't speak, the risk was too great, but she touched the corner of the tray with her finger, tracing an invisible letter. A. Lucas's chest tightened. For the first time, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, today could be different. The car ride to school was silent, the city flashing past like a blur of glass and steel. Lucas's palms were damp, his pencil case clutched like a lifeline. At the school gates, Ethan leaned toward him. "This is your chance, Lucas. Don't waste it." The words weren't cruel this time, but they carried weight heavy enough to bow Lucas's shoulders. He nodded again and stepped out. The classroom smelled of fresh paper and sharpened pencils. Other boys filed in, chatting casually. To them, this was just another test. To Lucas, it was war. The teacher handed out the exam booklets. "You may begin." Lucas opened the first page. Immediately, the letters began their familiar dance. His chest tightened. Sweat beaded on his forehead. For a heartbeat, panic threatened to drown him. Then he remembered Maya's whisper. Trace, say, write, read. He pressed his finger lightly along the first word, whispering under his breath. Slowly, the letters stilled. He sounded out the syllables one by one, the rhythm anchoring him. The first answer came, then the second. By the third, he realized he was actually doing it. Hours passed in tense silence. Lucas moved methodically, using every strategy Maya had given him. He whispered sounds, traced letters on his desk with invisible strokes, clapped rhythms softly against his thigh. Other boys glanced at him oddly, but he didn't care. For the first time, the words weren't impenetrable walls. They were doors, and he was learning how to unlock them. When the final bell rang, he set down his pencil, exhausted but proud. That afternoon, Ethan received the call at his office. He answered briskly, expecting another report of failure. But the voice on the line said something else entirely. "Mr. Montgomery, I thought you should know. Lucas achieved an A on today's assessment. His progress is remarkable. Whatever support he's receiving, it's working." Ethan froze. An A. The word felt foreign. He thanked the teacher stiffly and ended the call. For a long moment, he sat at his desk, staring at the skyline. An A. He could not remember the last time Lucas had brought home anything but failure. That evening, Lucas entered the mansion quietly, bracing himself for indifference. But to his shock, his father was waiting in the study. "Well?" Ethan demanded. Lucas swallowed. I got an A." He held out the paper, his hands trembling. Ethan snatched it, scanning the grade at the top. For the first time in years, his eyes widened, not in disappointment, but in disbelief. "You did this?" His voice was softer, almost bewildered. Lucas nodded. "I tried, the way Maya showed me." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Silence crashed into the room. Ethan's gaze snapped to the maid, who had just entered with a stack of folded linens. Maya froze. Ethan's jaw tightened. "You..." Maya set the linens down carefully. "Yes, sir." "You've been teaching him." She didn't deny it. "Yes." The room held its breath. Lucas's heart pounded. He waited for the explosion, the dismissal, the storm, but Ethan didn't shout. He didn't rage. He looked at his son who had just handed him an A. For the first time, Ethan Montgomery felt the ground shift beneath his certainty. He looked back at Maya, his voice caught between suspicion and something else. "We will talk later." Then he turned to Lucas. "Go upstairs. We'll discuss this in the morning." Lucas obeyed, but this time his chest carried not only fear. There was pride there, too. He had done it. He had an A. And no matter what happened next, no one could take that away. That night, Lucas taped the graded paper to his wall beside the earlier sentence he had read with Maya. He lay in bed staring at it, whispering to himself, "I did it. I really did." Downstairs, Maya sat in her small room, clutching her mother's notebook. Her heart was steady. The risk was real, but so was the victory. She whispered to the memory of her mother, He did it, Mama. He truly did. And in his study, Ethan Montgomery poured himself a glass of whiskey, staring at the A-grade paper on his desk. For the first time in years, he questioned the methods he had inherited from his own father. Pressure, discipline, punishment. None of it had ever brought results like this. Somewhere deep inside, a seed of doubt cracked open, and with it, the possibility of change. The following morning, the Montgomery mansion was not quite the same. The silence that had so often pressed against its walls now seemed thinner, as if one paper on a study desk, the one marked with an A, had cracked it. Yet silence still lingered, waiting for the master of the house to define it. Lucas woke early. He stared at the page he had taped above his bed, running his fingers across the letter as if to confirm it was real. He felt a pulse of pride each time he looked at it, but pride came mixed with fear. Would his father allow Maya to stay, or had yesterday's confession sealed her fate? Downstairs, Maya polished the silver in the dining room with deliberate calm. Every motion was steady, controlled. But inside, her heart churned. She knew what was coming. Wealthy men did not like being proven wrong, and Ethan Montgomery was not an exception. She braced herself for the inevitable summons. It came shortly after breakfast. Mr. Pierce, the butler, entered with his usual stiff formality. "Mr. Montgomery requests your presence in the study," he said, his voice tinged with curiosity. Servants rarely entered that room for anything other than dusting. Maya wiped her hands on her apron, squared her shoulders, and walked the long corridor. The heavy oak door loomed before her, its brass handle cold against her palm. She entered quietly. Ethan sat behind his mahogany desk, the A-graded test paper lying in front of him like evidence. He did not look up immediately. Instead, he poured coffee into a porcelain cup, stirred it once, and set the spoon down with precision. Finally, his eyes lifted, steel gray, sharp, but different than before. Not fury, something more complicated. "Close the door," he said. Maya obeyed. "You've been teaching my son." His voice was low, not a question. "Yes, sir," Maya answered, steady. "Without my permission, without credentials, without training." He tapped the paper with his finger. "And yet—" His words trailed off. Maya clasped her hands together. "Sir, Lucas doesn't need more pressure. He needs patience. He needs someone who understands how his mind works. I know because I was him. I fought the same battle. My mother taught me differently, and I passed that on." Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her as though she were a puzzle. "You mean to tell me that all the specialists, the tutors with degrees from Columbia and Yale, were useless, but you, a maid with no college diploma, somehow achieved what they couldn't?" Maya did not flinch. "Sometimes it isn't about diplomas. It's about seeing the child, not the problem." Silence stretched. Ethan's jaw worked as he considered her words. For years he had believed achievement was forged through fire, that pressure created diamonds. Yet here lay proof, in black ink on white paper, that his son had bloomed under something else entirely. Finally, Ethan spoke. "You saved him." The words came out rough, as though dragged from a place he rarely visited. Maya's breath caught. She had braced herself for dismissal, not acknowledgement. But Ethan wasn't finished. "I won't dismiss you. Not now. Instead, I want you to continue. Officially." He leaned forward, his gaze sharp again. "Not as a maid. As his tutor." Maya blinked. She had not expected this twist. "Sir, I didn't come here to—" "This isn't charity," Ethan interrupted. "I will pay you accordingly. Consider it a contract. You provide results, I provide compensation." Maya's heart tightened. To him, it was a transaction. To her, it was a purpose. She swallowed. With respect, Mr. Montgomery, this isn't about money. If I stay, it's because I believe Lucas deserves to see himself as more than worthless. I will teach him whether you call it a contract or not. Ethan's eyes narrowed, unused to being challenged. But beneath the steel, something flickered. He saw the conviction in her, and though he would never admit it aloud, he respected it. He stood. Very well. You remain. But understand this. My son's future is not a game. If you fail him, I won't, Maya said firmly. Their eyes locked. Two people from opposite worlds bound by the fragile hope of a boy upstairs. That afternoon, when Lucas crept into the study, he found Maya waiting, the familiar sand tray on the desk. His eyes widened. You're still here? Maya smiled gently. Yes, and I'm not going anywhere. Relief swept across his face. He nearly collapsed into the chair, his hands trembling with gratitude. I thought he'd send you away. Not today, Maya said softly. Now shall we get back to work? Lucas nodded, the fear of yesterday replaced by determination. Together they traced, whispered, clapped, read. But now each exercise carried a new weight. This was no longer rebellion in shadows. It was recognition. That evening, Ethan lingered outside the study door, listening. He heard his son's halting voice read a passage, then Maya's quiet encouragement. He felt something twist in his chest, an ache he could not name. He remembered his own childhood, his father's harsh voice, useless, weak. You'll never amount to anything. He had vowed never to be like him, and yet, hadn't he become the same? When Lucas's voice rang out, clearer, stronger than Ethan had ever heard, something broke inside him. Perhaps brilliance did not grow under pressure. Perhaps it bloomed under patience. Later that night, Lucas taped another page to his wall, his second victory. He lay in bed, staring at it with a smile. Downstairs, Maya closed her mother's notebook, whispering a prayer of thanks. And in his office, Ethan sat in silence, the city lights gleaming beyond the tall windows. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a different kind of legacy, not one built only of towers and contracts, but of a boy who had learned to believe in himself. Recognition had come, not just for Lucas, but for all of them. The city was alive that spring, its trees budding with fresh green, its sidewalks buzzing with new energy. But inside the Montgomery mansion, the greatest transformation was not in the gardens or the decor. It was in the quiet study where a boy, once silenced by fear, was finding his voice. Lucas now spent hours at his desk, not with dread, but with a kind of cautious excitement. His walls bore taped papers, victories, each one proof that he was no longer the boy defined by failure. Sentences he had once stumbled through now stood steady in his handwriting. Every page was a declaration. I am not worthless. Ethan watched this transformation with growing astonishment. For years he had believed his son was doomed to mediocrity, a weakness he could not tolerate. But now, day by day, he saw evidence that Lucas was capable of far more than he had ever imagined. The father who had once dismissed his child's struggles now found himself lingering by the doorway, drawn by the sound of halting words, Maya's gentle encouragement, and the boy's tentative pride. At Manhattan Private School, teachers began to notice too. Reports arrived by email. Marked improvement, reading aloud with confidence, newfound focus. One afternoon, Ethan received a message from Lucas's English teacher. Mr. Montgomery, I thought you should know. Your son read an entire passage aloud today without hesitation. The class applauded. It was a remarkable moment. Ethan read the email twice, his chest tightening with something unfamiliar. Pride. a word he had withheld for far too long. But pride was a fragile thing for Ethan, tangled in memories of his own father. He recalled the old man's voice, sharp as glass. Useless. Weak. You'll never inherit my business if you can't keep up. Those words had driven Ethan to build an empire of stone and steel, to prove his worth in skyscrapers and stock tickers. But in doing so, he had become the very echo of the voice that had scarred him. And now, watching Lucas, he realized he stood at a crossroad. He could either repeat the cycle or break it. One Saturday morning, Ethan surprised everyone by canceling his golf outing with partners from Wall Street. Instead, he entered the study while Lucas and Maya were mid-lesson. Lucas froze, expecting rebuke. But Ethan didn't scold. He pulled up a chair. "May I watch?" Maya blinked, startled, but nodded. Lucas's eyes widened, torn between fear and disbelief. "Go on," Ethan said softly. Lucas picked up his pencil, his hands trembling. He traced the words, whispered them, then read aloud, "The river flows fast in spring." Ethan held his breath. The sentence was not perfect, but it was whole. And when Lucas looked up, seeking approval, Ethan felt his throat tighten. "Well done, son," he said. The words were unfamiliar, awkward on his tongue, but true. Lucas's eyes glistened. It was the first time he had ever heard those words from his father. From that day, Ethan began to join the lessons. Not every time, but often enough to show he was trying. He asked questions, listened as Maya explained dyslexia in terms he could understand. Phonological deficit, cognitive load, multisensory pathways. Terms that once meant nothing to him now carried weight, because they belonged to his son's reality. He even tried some of the exercises himself, tracing letters in sand with a wry smile. "Feels ridiculous," he muttered, but he did it anyway. Lucas laughed for the first time in his father's presence, a sound that startled them both. "Brilliance doesn't grow under pressure," Maya said one afternoon as Ethan observed. "It blooms under patience." Ethan glanced at her, hearing the unspoken accusation. He gave a slow nod. "Then patience is what I'll learn." The breakthrough came one evening when Lucas brought home a report card. His grades were improving, not perfect, but steadily climbing. Ethan sat with him at the long dining table, scanning the paper. B in English, B+ in history, A in science. Ethan's voice trembled. "Lucas, this is progress. Real progress." Lucas stared at him, uncertain. "You're not mad?" "Mad?" Ethan's eyes softened. "No, son. I'm proud." The boy's lips parted, his breath catching. That single sentence was worth more than all the towers Ethan had ever built. Yet even as joy grew, Ethan's guilt deepened. He saw now how much harm his words had done, how many scars he had carved into his son's heart. One night, after Lucas had gone to bed, Ethan found himself standing in the boy's room, staring at the taped papers on the wall. Each one was a victory, but each one also reminded him of the years he had called his son worthless. Maya found him there, silent in the doorway. "He looks up to you," she whispered. Ethan swallowed hard. "I don't deserve it." "Maybe not," Maya said gently, "but you can earn it now." Her words struck him deeper than any boardroom battle ever had. The next weekend, Ethan did something unimaginable. He set aside his briefcase, turned off his phone, and invited Lucas to Central Park. Just the two of them. They walked among the budding trees, pigeons scattering at their feet. "Dad?" Lucas asked quietly. "Why are we here?" "Because I missed too much," Ethan admitted. and I don't want to miss more." Lucas stared at him, trying to measure if the words were true. Slowly, he reached out and took his father's hand. Ethan squeezed back, his heart aching with both regret and hope. That evening, back at the mansion, Ethan sat across from Maya in the study. For once, there was no sharpness in his tone, only humility. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I thought money and tutors could fix everything. I was wrong. You saw my son when I couldn't." Maya bowed her head slightly. "I only gave him what my mother gave me, belief." Ethan's gaze softened. "Then you gave him more than I ever did." For the first time, silence in the mansion did not feel oppressive. It felt like space for healing, space for words that had been too long unsaid. In the weeks that followed, Ethan changed in ways no one in his company could have predicted. He began leaving the office earlier, skipping meetings to be home for dinner. He still carried the weight of empire, but he no longer let it crush what truly mattered. One evening, as Lucas read aloud from a book he had once deemed impossible, Ethan leaned back and closed his eyes. The boy's voice was halting, imperfect but strong. Each word was a lesson, not for Lucas, but for his father. The lesson was this: love was not built on pressure but on patience. Pride was not earned through perfection, but through perseverance. And healing did not come from wealth, but from presence. Ethan Montgomery, billionaire of Manhattan, had finally learned his greatest lesson: a father's lesson. The Montgomery mansion had always been a fortress, silent, immaculate, and cold. Its marble floors reflected chandeliers like frozen stars. Its walls echoed only with commands and footsteps. But now, months after Maya first stepped through the back door, the mansion was changing. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, then all at once. It began with laughter, small, hesitant bursts of it spilling from the study when Lucas stumbled over a word and turned his mistake into a joke. Maya's chuckle would follow, warm and patient. Soon, even Ethan found himself smiling quietly at the sound, surprised that laughter could echo through these halls without feeling out of place. The mansion was learning to breathe. One evening, as spring gave way to summer, Lucas bounded into the dining room, clutching his newest report card. His hair was messy from running, his cheeks flushed. He slid the paper across the table to his father. Ethan opened it, his usual sternness ready to measure. But instead of disappointment, he found grades climbing steadily upward. B's and A's stood where F's had once bled in red ink. Ethan's throat tightened. He looked up at his son who had once believed he was broken. "Lucas," he said softly, "I'm proud of you." The words came naturally this time, not forced. Lucas's eyes shone, his lips trembling as he whispered, "Thanks, Dad." Maya, standing nearby with a tray, turned her face slightly so neither would see her tears. Life inside the mansion shifted in rhythm. Ethan began coming home earlier, sometimes shocking his staff by canceling late-night meetings on Wall Street. Once, he even skipped an investor dinner to rush home and watch Lucas present his science project on the solar system. He stood at the back of the study while Lucas nervously pointed to the planets, stumbling over words but never stopping. When the project was done, Ethan clapped, the sound startling in its sincerity. "You've come so far," Ethan said afterward, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. Lucas grinned shyly. "Because Maya showed me how." Ethan looked at Maya, their eyes meeting. For the first time, gratitude outweighed pride. The staff noticed, too. The whispers in the servants' quarters no longer carried disdain. Instead, they carried awe. "Have you seen the boy lately? He's different." Mr. Montgomery smiles more now. "And the maid? She's more than a maid. She's part of the family." Even Mr. Pierce, the rigid butler, softened. He no longer frowned when Maya lingered in the study. He nodded curtly instead, as though acknowledging that her presence was now indispensable. One Sunday morning, Ethan made a decision that startled the household. He canceled his scheduled board meeting. "Family dinner," he declared. The long dining table, once a place of cold etiquette, now filled with warmth. Lucas told stories about school, his hands flying with animation. Maya listened, laughing at his jokes. Ethan, instead of correcting his son's grammar or rushing him, leaned back and simply listened. For the first time, the dining room felt less like a stage and more like a home. But the greatest transformation came one ordinary weekday evening. Lucas had just finished reading a passage from Charlotte's Web, his voice halting but strong. He looked up, eyes wide. "I read a whole page, Dad." Ethan crossed the room, knelt beside his son, and embraced him. "I know, Lucas, and I've never been prouder." Lucas clung to him, the years of silence and shame melting into the warmth of that moment. Maya watched from the doorway, her heart full. The mansion exhaled, as if its walls themselves sighed in relief. One night, Ethan sat with Maya in the study after Lucas had gone to bed. The room was quiet, filled with the faint smell of old books and chalk dust. "I built towers across this city," Ethan said, gazing at the skyline through the tall windows, "but none of it matters if I couldn't build a home for my son." "You're building one now," Maya replied. He turned to her. "Not without you. You gave him what I couldn't." Maya shook her head gently. "I only reminded him of what he already had inside. You're the one who chose to change." For a long moment, Ethan was silent. Then, in a voice almost fragile, he said, "Thank you." It was not the voice of a billionaire, nor of a man who commanded boardrooms. It was the voice of a father learning humility. The final proof of change came on a Tuesday evening. Ethan was in the middle of a conference call with investors when his phone buzzed. It was Lucas, texting from upstairs. "Dad, can you come read with me?" Ethan looked at the spreadsheets glowing on his screen. For years, he had chosen numbers over moments like this. But tonight, he paused, then said into the phone, "Gentlemen, we'll reconvene tomorrow." He closed the laptop, stood, and climbed the staircase. In Lucas's room, his son was waiting with a book in hand. Ethan sat beside him on the bed, Maya quietly watching from the doorway. Together, father and son traced words with their fingers, whispering them aloud. Lucas stumbled. Ethan encouraged. Lucas succeeded. Ethan smiled. The mansion, once filled with silence, now echoed with voices learning together. By autumn, the transformation was undeniable. Lucas taped his newest test, marked with another A, to the refrigerator in the kitchen. The staff clapped. Maya laughed. Ethan snapped a photo, sending it not to investors, but to his sister with the caption, "Look at him. He's thriving." The Montgomery mansion had finally learned to breathe, and at the head of the table one evening, Ethan raised his glass. "To Lucas, for teaching me that success isn't built on skyscrapers, but on courage. And to Maya, for reminding us both that patience can rebuild a family." Lucas blushed, Maya lowered her eyes, and the dining room filled with something richer than any fortune: belonging. That night, as the city glittered beyond the windows, Ethan tucked his son into bed. Lucas whispered sleepily, "Dad?" "Yes, son?" "Are you proud of me?" Ethan's eyes softened. "More than you'll ever know." Lucas smiled, drifting into dreams. Downstairs, Maya closed her mother's notebook one final time. She whispered, "He's safe now, Mama. He's more than safe. He's loved." And in the stillness of the mansion, once suffocating, there was now warmth, A home that had been silent for too long had finally learned to breathe. And so, dear friends, the Montgomery Mansion, once a place of silence and shadows, became a home filled with laughter, belonging, and the fragile miracle of patience. This was never just a story about a billionaire, a maid, or a boy struggling with words. It was a story about breaking cycles, about finding courage in unlikely places, and about love blooming where no one expected it. Lucas learned that he was never broken. Maya proved that compassion can rewrite a life. And Ethan discovered that the greatest empire he could ever build was not of glass and steel, but of trust and presence with his son. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for staying with us until the very end of this journey. Your presence turns these words into something alive, something shared. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing so you'll never miss the next tale of hope, healing, and second chances. Until then, may your homes too learn to breathe, with laughter, with patience, and with love.